Unless you've been living under a rock for the past few years, you've probably encountered the now cult phenomenon that is the Backrooms. And if you're anything like me, you've also been fascinated by it. Like so many internet phenomena, it was born on 4chan, a simple, still image of this strange yellow-tinted doorway leading into a conspicuously empty space. From the very first day, something about this uncanny image struck a chord with the internet because since then, the phenomenon of the Backrooms has become something of a juggernaut in modern internet subculture, catching the collective imagination of thousands and bringing mass popularity to a new genre, the genre of liminal spaces. There was something about the idea of that dreary mono-yellow and the endless background noise of fluorescent lights at maximum hum buzz, as the original 4chan poster had it. Especially after the incredibly well-made found footage videos by Kane Pixels, people have just been going crazy about this idea of the backrooms and liminal spaces in general. The original simple concept of an endlessly extended series of rooms seemingly inspired by the uninteresting monotony of an office locale has been expanded upon in a myriad ways and demonstrated that the uncanny valley is not limited to creepy humanoids. But why? Why is it that something as unstriking as an empty office building can become so strikingly unnerving in the right context? What is it about the seemingly silly concept of no-clipping through the ground? About thinking you hear the voice of another human being in this godforsaken place just around the corner, hoping and praying that you've finally found someone else, only to discover that it was nothing but a radio? Liminality as a concept describes a certain feeling you can experience in situations where you somehow find yourself on the boundary, or, well, limit of something. The most obvious way to use liminality is in the form of a liminal space, a physical place which is designed not to be inhabited permanently, but to be transited through on the path to someplace more familiar. The classic example is something like a bus stop, hotel hallway, or even a train. Typically, we don't notice these places at all, precisely because we're not there for them. We're just passing through, if you will, or at best, like in the case of an office building, we're there to do something else. The space is more or less irrelevant. The moments these places really stick out at us only really arise when we find ourselves alone. Have you ever had to get up really early in the morning to take a bus or train and then realized that you're the only person at the station? It's a strange feeling. Although you've been here 1,000 times before, something just doesn't quite feel right this time. When you enter a physical location that you know is designed to serve a specific purpose, and that purpose is absent, that's when a place can enter the uncanny valley. You feel apprehensive, maybe like a monster could jump out from around the corner at any moment. And what do you know? There is indeed a monster in the backrooms. Humans can never really be satisfied with just a creepy atmosphere for some reason. We always need some kind of monster chasing you to go along with it. But anyway, although it sort of blew up with the backrooms, this vibe that I'm describing here has been around the nooks and crannies of the internet for a long time. Certain video games have the ability, whether intentional or not, to be incredibly unnerving in the right context. For example, as a fan of sandboxing, I've spent my fair share of hours playing Garry's Mod, the incredibly popular Half-Life 2 mod Become Game. On multiplayer, everything is more or less as you might expect. The game has some interesting game modes like Prop Hunt and Trouble in Terrorist Town. But in single player, oh boy, I don't think I know of another game that has quite the same, albeit unintentional, ability to creep you out. This has been talked about before, and I'd recommend watching this video if you feel like you know what I'm talking about. Although most of the maps are pretty much unremarkable, the thing about Gmod Sandbox is that when you load one of these maps, there's absolutely nothing else there. Not a single NPC or item to be seen anywhere. And yet, there are these Half-Life 2 sound effects in the background. Soundbites of traffic, electricity and distant sirens, but they're not coming from anywhere. It's like there's something crucial missing. You expect something to happen, to find a source of this sound, but all you ever find is the edge of the map, which you can no-clip very easily through, by the way. There's also something about the aesthetic of the source textures that's just a bit unnerving. Many of them are distinctly pixelated and two-dimensional, like doors into buildings you can't enter. It's off by just the right amount to feel oddly artificial. Like the librarian said in his video, they seem to be both realistic and unrealistic at the same time. So maybe you could say they're liminally realistic. And have you ever seen a photo of one of those abandoned, unprofitable malls fallen prey to the sands of time and changing consumer preferences? They're called dead malls and are a hugely prevalent phenomenon, especially in the United States. Because of the shrinking middle class and our increasingly digitized lives, malls are closing at unprecedented rates, leaving behind eerily empty, wide-open spaces that soon enough find their way onto the internet. The environment is still the same, but the lack of activity makes them feel out of place. Because being empty contradicts its purpose, the mall becomes a kind of oxymoron that doesn't make sense to the lower layers of our psyche, triggering the very same subliminal responses as all those images out of the Uncanny Valley. Like so much of what scares us, the creep factor in liminal spaces is all about subverting expectations in a very specific way, by presenting a space we normally see accompanied by a certain kind of activity or atmosphere, and then negating or omitting that. Now, to get back to the topic of this video, the Backrooms combines the kind of weirdness we find in dead malls with the weirdness of lonely games like Gmod Sandbox to create a unique blend that very unsurprisingly appealed to a lot of people. With a completely virtual reality inching closer each year, I think many of us feel like our actual reality is becoming less and less real, almost like it could all be a video game. You know the age-old question, is it all just a simulation? The Backrooms brews all these factors together in a kind of metaphysical soup. Not only do we have the out-of-place strangeness of an empty, abandoned mall or office, not only do we have the masiophobia of an infinitely extended space, like you might have in an inescapable dark cave. The Backrooms also leverages our deep-seated fear that it's all just a simulation, through the idea that if you're in just the wrong place, at just the wrong time, you can no-clip through the fabric of reality itself and be lost forever in an extra-dimensional space. I don't think a lot of people would disagree with me anymore, at least, that the best interpretation of the basic Backrooms idea is the one developed by Kane Pixels over the course of his ongoing found footage YouTube trilogy. Kane applies his incredible filmmaking skills to turn this idea into a living reality. So as a conclusion to this video, I want to go through one of his most recent uploads and reflect a little bit on the techniques and ideas he uses, why they're so incredibly effective, and why they seem to appeal to our minds. The video I want to talk about is entitled Backrooms, Found Footage Number 3. Like previous entries, it follows yet another unfortunate victim, Robbie, starting out in the normal world before he soon enough finds himself lost in the Backrooms. If you haven't seen it on your own, I highly recommend you do so before you continue. It needs to be experienced on its own terms first. The first small thing we notice is a recurring device Kane uses in these films, and which he has in common with the broader genre of analog horror, namely VHS distortion. Besides creating realism, it also has a kind of nostalgic effect. As we all know, a lot of horror weaponizes nostalgia to creep us out, and this is no different. Anyway, let's continue.
Someone there?
Our unfortunate friend gets to a house, presumably his home, and it looks like someone's broken in. However, the house turns out to be an entry point into the backrooms. Since nobody's actually inside, it's very possible that there was no break-in, but that someone actually broke out after being fortunate enough to warp back into the real world from the backrooms. Our protagonist then discovers a part of the house which he clearly didn't know about. Suddenly the lights flicker, and he warps into the backrooms proper. I discussed earlier why I think some games like Gmod have the potential to be so creepy, and we see a strong similarity here. You see all these chairs? It's like the environment has been filled with a bunch of random props that serve no actual purpose, but all of which are still obviously very familiar to us. This element is something Kane introduced to the backrooms, as the original image shows nothing more than a series of empty rooms. By including items, chairs, tables, microwaves, and what have you, Kane creates the sense that the backrooms are supposed to have a purpose. Maybe this is a meeting room, and this here is a waiting room for a dentist or something. The various rooms feel like they could have a purpose, and when that possibility is contradicted by the lack of people and totally nonsensical layout, a new layer of eeriness is experienced that wasn't really there before when it was just a mono-yellow empty space. Building on what I said earlier, I find it interesting how we find seemingly random items placed inappropriately in certain places. We saw a toy carpet earlier, and here we have a bunch of scattered water jugs, completely out of context. To me, this apparent randomness supports a certain theory about Kane Pixel's backrooms, which I'll briefly outline here. Clearly, the backrooms operate in a way similar to procedurally generated landscapes in games. Procedural generation is the process by which randomized environments are created based on certain predefined rules, like the biomes of Minecraft, for example. But what would those rules be in the case of the backrooms? One theory I have is that the backrooms are somehow generated based on the environments and items humans spend time in and use at any given time, maybe with a slight delay. Like the backrooms themselves are some sort of collective dream. If you think about your own dreams, you'll notice that oftentimes your dreams are based on what happened the previous day. I once played Monopoly a whole evening, and that night, I dreamt of playing it for as long as I was asleep, and the first thing I saw in the morning was Monopoly Man's face popping up in my head. And in general, all your dreams involve some combination of things that are familiar to you. So maybe the backrooms are randomly generated and change over time based on a similar set of ideas in the collective consciousness of humanity. Just a quick theory for you. Towards the middle, our protagonist enters a music-themed area filled with awkward-looking speakers, which also contains some kind of radio system. Relieved, Robbie manages to establish what seems like communication with an outside party. This is a good place to note that the music Kane uses really complements the overall idea of the backrooms. The first track we hear, called Still Life, has the basics of a melody and harmony but lacks any sense of meaningful progression. It's a track that's stuck, levitating in empty space, repeating variations of the same motif over and over again. A perfect reflection of the vaguely familiar, yet unnatural and boundless backrooms. And the track we hear in this section, entitled Gas Stove in Chinese, is essentially a never-ending percussion loop, which I can only describe as sounding strangely uncomfortable. It's not really ominous, but still oddly tense. And like still life, it never ends. It never actually goes anywhere. It just goes on and on and on, exactly like the backrooms themselves. After seeming to establish some communication, our protagonist hears the muffled voices of someone speaking. He gradually gets closer to the source, thinking he's finally found someone else in this god-forsaken place. But when he gets there, there's no one. And instead, we hear what seems to be the mating call of the monster as he gets chased down. Based on the layout, it seems like the monster did come out of the room where we heard the radio chatter, suggesting that it might have been imitating the sound to trick the protagonist, but it's hard to tell. Another quick detail. I love how Kane placed this random cardboard cutout of this caveman-looking guy on the way back. It wasn't there when Robbie passed through last, and to me it perfectly illustrates another reason why Kane's backrooms are so engaging. It's like the backrooms are constantly posing questions to you. Why is this here? When did it show up? Why did it show up? Why did the lights suddenly turn off? Why do I keep hearing music? Part of the appeal of these types of liminal spaces is that they pose questions to you. They present these mysteries, but they never answer them. These random details are like a series of question marks that are just presented to you, but never resolved, just like how the backrooms themselves are a single infinite boundary, a single liminal space that never actually crosses into something familiar and known. A liminal space, but never a place. Now, this video has been going on long enough already, so I'll skip ahead to the last really interesting section, when the protagonist reaches what looks like a suburban home.
Hello?
Inside, he can hear the muffled speech of a man talking on the phone, seemingly on the other side of a wall. At first, the man accuses our protagonist of trespassing on his property, but soon finds himself just as confused, as he's unable to find him. He concludes that the protagonist must be inside his wall and tries to get him out by opening it. But then, this happens.
I can open up the wall here, it's still loose, but I need you to move slowly, all right?
Thank you.
Come out with your hands first. I want to see your face, and we'll take things from there.
Thank you. I think
What
it's...
the fuck? What the fuck? What? Oh my god. Oh my god, wow, what the fuck?
Hello?
It seems like there are certain places in the backrooms that somehow intersect with parts of the real world, such that a person on one side can hear and interact with someone on the other. And after opening his wall to help our protagonist, it seems like this guy found an entrance into the backrooms and fell right in himself, never to be seen again. So it's like the backrooms and our own reality exist in parallel with each other, so to speak. Perhaps each place here corresponds to a place there, and in some places the barrier between them happens to be just a little too thin. I still can't claim to understand all the details of Kane Pixel's backrooms, but I'll certainly be on the lookout for new episodes so we can learn more. What is clear though is that the backrooms as an idea, an infinite space superimposed on our own reality and filled with a never-ending, seemingly man-made landscape, has caught an incredible momentum as an aesthetic. Each genre of horror hijacks an innate human fear and takes it to its extreme to create something truly terrifying. The Backrooms hijacks our fear of being on the boundary, on the limit of two familiar places, and makes it so that the limit goes on forever, never reaching someplace known, never giving you an answer or a resolution to any of your questions or desires. It traps you on the boundary but never lets you actually pass through. If you enjoyed this little walk through the Backrooms, please like and subscribe and let me know if you have any suggestions for future videos. Thanks for watching and I'll see you next time.